This is Open to Hope Radio, featuring Dr. Gloria Horsley and her daughter, Dr. Heidi Horsley, coming to you on behalf of the Open to Hope Foundation, dedicated to those who are looking for hope after loss. Now, here's Dr. Gloria.
Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my co-host, Dr. Heidi Horsley. We've got a great guest today, and it's a topic that you and I are extremely interested in resiliency and faith and those kinds of issues. Why don't you introduce our guest?
Okay, I'd love to. Our guest today is named Dr. Janet Ramsey, and Dr. Janet Ramsey is Professor Emeritus of Congregational Care Leadership at Luther Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota. She is also a marriage and family therapist and an ordained Lutheran pastor, and she is a wife, mother, and grandmother. Her most recent book is Spiritual Resiliency and Aging, Hope, Relationality, and the Creative Self. Welcome to the show, Janet.
Thank you so much, Heidi.
It's so great to have you on the show, and what a great topic. And I just want to get right into it because you've got so much to share with us today. Talk a little bit about the baby boomers and what's happened right now with people.
Well, most of my work has been done with the last third of life, as you know, and now that we have what's been called the age wave at times in the past, there are other words for that trend as well, but there's definitely something very significant going on demographically. It has been called the age wave, but what's going on without any question at all is that there are huge numbers of persons who are going to be moving into the latter years here at a time when there seems to be a bit of confusion about roles, expectations, resources, many things connected with those latter years. However, I think we also need to keep in mind those who are already old, and particularly the very frail old. I worked at one part of my life vocationally as a nursing home chaplain, and so I have a particularly warm spot in my heart for those whose losses are very extensive because they no longer live in their own homes. The friendship networks that sustain them are often gone. Many times their adult children are not in the community. So that part of the population is too very interesting, as well as those older adults living at home who are in relatively good health, but still have to say goodbye to so many of their friends and family members.
Mm-hmm. Now, Heidi and I were talking with you earlier about what's happened with the church, and the reason I bring that in is because you're talking about the fact that people have had a loss of community in a lot of ways, because our religion in the past has been our community, hasn't it?
Well, yes, when people attended church more regularly as a nation, and when they were less mobile geographically, it was easier to find a sense of community. And I think in some of our rural areas that it still is the case. But rural areas are losing a lot of their younger members, as you know, moving away for jobs. And so you have kind of an aging of the rural communities, too, which means that the intergenerational resources aren't there for folks as well. But when you start talking about older adults in any form, you have to be so aware of the diversity of that population. And who are you talking about? Are you talking about people who are institutionalized, people at home, people who are sick, people who are well, people who are rural, people in urban areas, people who are better educated? It's a very diverse population. Mm-hmm. I often tell my students older adults are much more diverse than younger adults because of course, they've had many more life experiences, and that's what makes us who we are, our reflection on our life experiences. Mm-hmm. So they've had more time to become different from one another, which is, of course, opposite from the kind of ageist portrayal of the little old grandmother sitting on the porch.
That's such an interesting thought. Go ahead, Heidi.
I was just going to say, when you reference older adults, is that baby boomers on up, or what age are we talking about?
Baby boomers are now moving into the 65-plus category, but it's a fluid phrase. To say older adults is defined differently by everybody. It used to be that because retirement was about 65, that was the magic number, but we know that there are many people at 70 and 75 who are healthier than some folks who are at 55. So that is something that most researchers and writers and teachers just have to define as they go in terms of what they mean by that phrase, older adult.
Mm-hmm. So I wanted to ask you, because our audience is out there and they're saying, one of the things that I find concerning is that with the lack of religion, at least in my own religion, I found that there was, my sister recently passed away, and she's from a small town, and we're going to have her funeral, and we know where it's going to be. We know because she belongs to a religious community, there's a protocol and there is a stepping through it where we all know what's going to happen and where we're going to be. And I think we're going to lose that. What's your thought on that?
It's not only do we know where we're going to be at the funeral, but we know where she is going to be now that she has died.
I've been doing research and asking this question. Why is it that some people cope so much better with losses in their life? And I went to graduate school and started reading a lot of articles that would list many factors, such as social support, economic, and health status. And I would be sitting there in class after my years as a parish pastor and a nursing home chaplain, and I would think to myself, well, that doesn't really match with a lot of my experience, because when I would go into a room and ask an older adult, how did you get through that rough time when your adult child died or when you had to say goodbye to your home? And they wouldn't, talk about their financial portfolio or their health status. They would say, I couldn't have done it without the Lord. Mm-hmm. And so I was very interested in how I might do some research on religion and aging in ways that would be acceptable in a secular institution. And so I did my dissertation on this topic and started interviewing older adults in Germany and America. And that's been kind of a project ever since that time. My second book, Spiritual Resiliency and Aging, that you mentioned earlier, is really the fruit of my reflecting, along with Rosemary Bleasner at Virginia Tech, on what we learned there. And to our surprise, especially the first time around, we did not discover that resiliency in the face of loss was an individual accomplishment, but rather it was, as you just said a few minutes ago, Gloria, it was based really on this the sense of being anchored in a spiritual community. Now, it did not mean that people were walking around with their heads in the cloud, denying the realities of losses. That was the other thing we found, that their hope was very, very much balanced by an acceptance of the real things in their life, and the honesty that they had to name those losses was part of their resiliency as well. And also in terms of their connection with people in community, it wasn't that they lost themselves in those communities and blindly went along with the teachings or had no sense of who they were, but rather they were actually quite differentiated. They knew at times that they disagreed with things within their institutional communities, but they felt creative enough and courageous enough to speak out against things they thought needed changes, while at the same time really having a sense of identity and support that came from their community. And Heidi, to address your question about teachings in communities about the afterlife, I think each religious community has its own symbols of faith. In the Lutheran tradition, which was the tradition of the people that I interviewed, it's very much anchored in the promises of God and to kind of leaning into a future that God has made for us that goes beyond this life. And yes, that's something that these folks were not afraid to talk about. But neither did they live just as folks seem to, perhaps if you think about the Middle Ages, when people use that idea of the afterlife as a way of escaping their responsibilities today. They also believe that eternal life begins now in terms of their relationship with God and with each other.
Now, let me ask you this. I'm out in the audience now, and I'm listening to this, and I'm thinking, okay, I've had a loss. And I wasn't connected with my spiritual community. I'm hearing you, and I'm thinking about how I was raised in my childhood, or even finding a new community.
Right.
Do you think it'd help me now? If I'm feeling sad and abandoned and whatever.
Well, yeah, and I think we have to enlarge the idea of what a spiritual community is as well. There are some places that offer spiritual symbols and richness and support that aren't within the walls of a church. One of the things that comes to mind are support groups for people, hospice work, AA, groups like that have a lot to teach organized religion about how to really be supportive to other people. But yes, certainly, one of the things I can only say what I've tended to in my life after doing this research, I've been much more intentional about being sure that I was part of a spiritual community, because I very much was impressed by what that meant for the women and men in Germany and the United States who found that to be their great source of support. But I am concerned about the fact that many generations to come, the generation to come does not seem to have that same source of support. But on the other hand, sometimes they have a spiritual community that, as I said, is not within a church wall either.
I'm thinking of, and I'm sure my mom is, Janet, about Compassionate Friends. My mom and I are both very involved in the Compassionate Friends, and that is a peer-to-peer support organization.
Absolutely, absolutely. The thing that you have in a wonderful organization like that is the care of other people and the sense of working together to find meaning. Which I think is so much an important part of this, and also that part about honestly naming the losses. The only thing that is not there that some people find really important is this kind of symbolic language. I don't know if you're acquainted with Barbara Meyerhoff's work. She was my inspiration. She worked with the conservative Jewish population in Los Angeles, the older population out there, and she wrote extensively of how important the symbols of the faith are to people, the stories of the faith, that meta-narrative, the larger narrative that people find so helpful when their own losses, the story of their own losses come along. And I found something very similar in my work, that being able to place your own story of loss within a larger story is one way not only to find meaning, but to live into something that's greater than yourself.
Wow.
So I think that's one of the advantages of religious communities, whether they be organized or not, that support groups may not have. Now, I think they do have their own symbolic language to some extent, but it doesn't have the same long-term narrative. You know
right?
What I'm talking about here?
Exactly.
So Janet, are there things that people out there that are grieving can do to become more resilient after a loss?
Right. Well, that term resilience, when I started working in this area and I'd go online and typed in spiritual resiliency, my own name was the only thing that would come up. But resiliency has become such a buzzword now, and I think that's a great thing. Anyone can look at their own story, and with or without the help of a therapist or a counselor or a rabbi or a pastor, they can look at their own story, not only to look at the times of brokenness and fear, but also to say, where are the sources of my strength? How did I manage to do that? And that's what resiliency is about. When I sit with someone who's just had a loss in my clinical work, I'm really not that interested in putting down a diagnosis. I have to do it for the insurance companies. But I'm much more interested in listening carefully for their strengths, for exceptions to the times when they felt that they were really losing it. Not in a Pollyanna kind of way to deny that. I mean, sometimes you just have to be with people and let them lament for a long time, especially
I
over
like that
horrific
idea.
loss.
I like looking at their strengths. I mean, I remember working with someone after 9/11, and she said, Heidi, getting out of bed feels like someone threw cinder blocks on my feet and threw me at the bottom of a pond and told me to swim to the top. That's how hard it is to get out of bed. And I looked at her and said, wow, how were you able to get here today?
Exactly.
I mean, if that's what's going on, how did you manage to get to my office?
It's amazing how that will help people to realize that they have those strengths. That's so important.
So maybe for people out there looking at what's working in their lives.
I really believe that our wounds are part of the wounds of a God who cares about us and loves us. And there are times when friends are afraid to accompany us and don't want to listen to our laments. But keep trying until you find someone who has enough care and enough spiritual depth to be able to accompany you, because you are not alone, but you need someone in the real world who can be your companion on this journey.
So thanks so much for being on the show today.
My pleasure.
You've been listening to Open to Hope Radio, hosted by Drs. Gloria and Heidi Horsley. Like today's edition, all of our past programs are available on demand at opentohope.com. along with helpful articles, videos, resources, and links to help get you through the toughest time of your life. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter and sign up for our monthly newsletter. Again, that's opentohope.com. Check it out today. Then be sure to stop by next Thursday at 9 a.m. Pacific Time when we'll be posting another edition of Open to Hope Radio. Remember, others have been where you are. They made it through, and you can too, as long as you're open to hope.